The alien princess lay bleeding and broken in the rubble, wounded and left for dead by her own troops, until the grizzled human soldier cradled her limp body and carried her to safety. The old space captain took a swig of whiskey, the amber liquid burning his throat. Zephyr stared at the bright-eyed recruits gathered round, hanging on his every word. Tales of his adventures never failed to captivate the young ones. "Y'all want to hear the story of how one human soldier saved a Xeno princess and turned the tide of the whole damn war?" Zephyr asked. The recruits nodded, leaning closer. Zephyr set down his glass. "This all went down in the middle of the Xindi-human war. Nastiest conflict I ever saw. Them Xindi bastards, they attacked our colonies out of nowhere, tried to wipe us out just 'cause they thought we was inferior. But humanity, we're made of stronger stuff than they reckoned. The Xindi launched an all-out assault on Zephyrus Prime, a border planet loaded with resources. They aimed to stomp out our boys and claim that rock. Only thing standing in their way was Captain Ryan Rogers and his squad." Now Rogers, he was a different breed, tougher than a box of nails and twice as sharp. Had a real talent for creative tactics. Him and his men hunkered down in some bombed-out city ruins, holding the line against the Xeno horde. Zephyr took another pull of booze. Those Xindi pricks had a secret weapon, though. Princess Janus, the Emperor's daughter herself. She was embedded with their army, supposed to lead them to glory and crush mankind underfoot. He fixed the recruits with a hard stare. "But let me tell you, fate had other plans. 'Cause if Rogers failed, every human on that planet was dead meat. The Xindi wouldn't spare a soul." The recruits waited with bated breath, afraid to blink and miss a beat. What happened next could reshape the galaxy's future. Zephyr leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. Rogers spotted the collapsed building while flanking the Xeno position. Plasma still sizzled on shattered stone. He knew in his gut any Xindi inside was long dead, but he had to check for human survivors. The old captain took another swig, savoring the burn. Rogers picked his way through the rubble, carbine at the ready. That's when he saw her. The Xindi princess, trapped under a steel beam. Blue blood oozed from her wounds. Her breath came shallow and ragged. Now Rogers had every right to put a bullet between her eyes and leave her to rot. She was the enemy, plain and simple. But looking at her lying there, broken, Zephyr shook his head. He saw a person, not a Xeno. Someone scared and hurting, same as any of us. The recruits waited, hardly daring to breathe. Zephyr continued. Rogers made a choice, the hardest damn choice of his life. He slung his weapon and started digging the princess free, bellowing for a medic. "Covey, get your ass over here, we got a casualty." The squad medic came running, sliding to a stop when he saw who Rogers was helping. "Sir, what the hell are you—" Rogers cut him off. "I gave you an order, soldier. Now get to work before she bleeds out." Covey patched the princess up best he could. The fighting died down, both sides too stunned to shoot. By the time Janus regained consciousness, she was laid out safe behind human lines, Rogers watching over her. Zephyr met the recruit's eyes. That was the start of something no one saw coming. A Xeno royal in the hands of mankind and a human captain willing to save her life. The brass on both sides was spitting mad, but Rogers had a plan. He sent word through back channels offering a truce, one-on-one talks between him and Janus, to find a way to end this war with honor. The Xindi Emperor Near had a stroke, but he knew Rogers had him by the short hairs. This was a shot at peace, and he'd be a fool not to take it. So that's how a single act of mercy from one soldier to another flipped the whole damn script. Rogers and Janus hunkered down to talk terms while the galaxy held its breath. But those negotiations and what came after, Zephyr chuckled, taking another pull from his glass. Well, that's a story for another day. Zephyr leans forward, his voice low and intense. Rogers and Janus fought their way through the chaos, dodging fire from both human and Xindi forces. The princess's own father had put a price on her head, branding her a traitor for daring to seek peace. Rogers's superiors were no better, threatening to court-martial him for disobeying orders. He takes a swig of whiskey, savoring the burn. But those two, they had a fire in them that couldn't be quenched. They knew their message was too important to let die, So they hatched a plan, bold as brass and twice as risky. The recruits edge forward, hanging on his every word. Zephyr grins, relishing the attention. They snuck into a Xindi comms center, just the two of them against a whole squad of guards. Rogers took them down hard and fast, while Janus hacked into the system, and then, with the whole damn war listening, they broadcast their story. He leans back, shaking his head. You should have seen it. 2 soldiers, human and Xindi, standing side by side, calling for an end to the fighting, saying they'd found a better way, through understanding and respect. It was enough to make your heart stop. Zephyr pauses, letting the weight of the moment sink in. And you know what? It worked. Soldiers on both sides, they'd had enough of the killing. They started laying down arms, trading stories instead of bullets. Command nearly shit themselves, but they couldn't stop it. The people had tasted peace and they hungered for more. He chuckles low and deep. Soon enough the brass had no choice. They called a ceasefire, started talking terms, and who do you think they called in to mediate? None other than Captain Rogers and Princess Janus themselves. The old captain sighs, lost in the memory. It wasn't easy, mind you. Decades of bad blood take more than a few words to wash away. But Rogers, he had a way of cutting through the bullshit. And Janus, she knew her people inside and out. Between the two of them, they got the job done. Zephyr's eyes hardened as he recounted the final act of treachery. The grand hall was packed. Dignitaries from both sides gathered to witness the historic moment. Rogers and Janus stood tall, their hands clasped together as they prepared to sign the treaty that would end the war and unite their peoples. But as the pen touched paper, all hell broke loose. Blaster fire erupted from the balconies, red bolts searing the air. Screams filled the room as the assassins, hand-picked by the Xindi Emperor himself, unleashed their deadly barrage. Rogers reacted on instinct, his body moving before his mind could catch up. He dove in front of Janus, his broad frame shielding her from the onslaught. The blasts slammed into his back, burning through flesh and bone. Janus screamed as Rogers crumpled to the ground, his blood staining the marble floor. She cradled his head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. All around them, security forces leapt into action, humans and Xindi fighting side by side to subdue the attackers. But for Janus, the world had narrowed to the man dying in her arms. Rogers looked up at her, his eyes filled with pain and something else, something that made her heart ache. "Don't let this be for nothing," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Promise me you'll keep fighting for peace, for both our peoples." Janus nodded, her tears falling onto his face. "I promise," she whispered. "I won't let your sacrifice be in vain." Rogers smiled, a weak, bloody thing. Then his eyes slid shut, his body going limp in her arms. Janus threw back her head and howled, a sound of pure anguish that echoed through the hall. The fighting had stopped, the assassins lying dead or restrained. But the damage had been done. In the days that followed, the galaxy mourned. Rogers was hailed as a hero, a symbol of the unity he had died to achieve. And Janus, heartbroken but determined, took up his mantle. She renounced her title, her privilege, everything she had ever known. She became a leader, a voice for peace in a galaxy still reeling from war. It wasn't easy, the old hatreds ran deep, but she never wavered, never lost sight of the dream she and Rogers had shared. Slowly, painfully, the Xindi and the humans began to heal. Joint projects, cultural exchanges, 1,000 small steps towards understanding. And through it all, Janus was there, a living reminder of the price of peace. In the end, her own people turned against the Emperor. They were tired of the fighting, tired of the hatred. They threw him down and rallied around Janus, the princess who had become so much more. Under her guidance, the Xindi entered a new age. An age of cooperation, of exploration, of reaching out to the stars instead of conquering them. And always, always she carried Rogers with her. His memory, his sacrifice, the love that had bloomed between them in the midst of war. Zephyr fell silent, his eyes distant. The recruits sat in stunned silence, their minds reeling from the tale they had just heard. A human and a Zindi, enemies turned lovers, martyrs for a cause greater than themselves. Finally Zephyr spoke again, his voice rough with emotion. That's the lesson I want you to take from this. The lesson Rogers and Janus taught us all. That no matter our differences, no matter the gulf between us, we're all just people in the end. People with hopes and dreams and the capacity for good if only we have the courage to reach for it. He raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. To Rogers and Janus, he said, his voice ringing through the room. May their story never be forgotten. May their sacrifice light the way for us all. The recruits raised their glasses in turn, the toast echoing through the hall. And in that moment they could almost feel it, the weight of history, the promise of a future yet to be written, a future they would help shape, guided by the memory of two lovers who had changed the galaxy. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.